Okay. Welcome to Cal-ISBOA's first webinar in 2020. This is Martha Ambrose. I'm the Executive Director of Cal-ISBOA. And it has been my pleasure to work with Knowing Technologies in putting together this webinar. This started with a discussion that we had probably right after the annual conference in May. Jim Puccetti of Knowing and I did a brief survey, which some of you may remember, about business officers and using technology at school. And one of the things we learned from that was that our schools are using the Google suite of products, and there's a great range of knowledge out there about how to best use them and how to use them in a secure fashion. And that was sort of the jumping off point for building this webinar. And I'm introducing Jim Puccetti now. He's the Director of Teacher Development and Instructional Design at Knowing, and he is going to facilitate this webinar. Jim, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Martha. And as Martha was describing, we're really excited to get this group together. And when we were thinking about designing this presentation, or really this conversation, we really wanted to make sure that it was really designed in such a way that was easily digestible by business officers. So we're excited for this opportunity, excited to partner with Martha and her team. A little bit about us, Knowing Technologies. If you don't know of us, we know that some of those that are signed up for today, we do know that we currently work with you. Knowing Technologies, we are a comprehensive, strategy-driven technology solution for schools. And really what we do is we partner with schools to expand opportunities for empowered learning and innovation. And as part of that, this topic that we're going to be discussing today is really kind of in the umbrella of what we do as a comprehensive technology solution. So I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction to us. And I'd like to now introduce our other panelists. So with us today, we have two of my colleagues from Knowing Technologies. We have Crystal Ho and we have Jeff Desjardins. And then we also have a member from Google. We have Tom Dixon, who is the Google for Education Program Manager. So I'm going to pass it over to Crystal to give you a little bit more of a background of who she is.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Ho, and I've been in education for 17 years. The past 6 years, I've been an innovation coach, and during that time, I became a Google certified trainer, innovator, and product expert, which has been amazing. And I've also been working with schools on the Student Data Privacy Consortium and keeping schools and their data safe.
Hi, my name is Jeff Desjardins. I'm a network and systems engineer at Knowing Technologies. I've been working with GSuite for education administration for 11 years and across more than 40 schools.
And hi, everyone. My name's Tom Dixon. I'm a program manager for Google for Education. I look after the state of California. I've been with the team for almost 3 years now, and former classroom teacher myself. So looking forward to participating in the conversation.
All right, thanks everyone. I as well am also a former classroom educator, and I specifically run our instructional innovation program for Knowing Technologies, something that some of you may have heard of. So today, in today's conversation, we really want this to feel like a conversation. So as audience members, please, as you pull up the Zoom toolbar or set of tools, you'll see a Q&A section. So if you select that, that's where we'd like you to add comments, questions, any new ideas that might come up or any thoughts, please add to the Q&A section and not the chat section. All right? Okay, let's jump right into it. So in today's conversation, our hope is to help you to identify key risk areas, share why these areas are important for all of us to consider and explore, and equip you with strategies to address these key areas. So these are specific areas today. So GSuite for education, we're going to dig a little bit more deeply into GSuite administration setup, talk about the difference, maybe define and then talk about the difference between core and non-core applications. And then we're going to transition into student data privacy. And that's where Tom will share more on behalf of Google and their commitment around student data privacy. And then we're going to finish with what you can do to get started if you haven't already started around student data privacy. Around each of these sections, we'll also pause for some Q&A time for everyone to make sure this feels like a conversation. So this first topic of GSuite administration. So we're going to pose a few questions for you. And really what we wanted this to do was be a catalyst for you to do some self-reflection. And if you have answers to these questions, that's great. If not, you're armed with some really good stuff to bring back to your school site and either talk as a leadership team or talk with, if you have a technology team, start to hash out these questions and see if there are some solutions to them. So the first question I have up here is, who has admin access at your school site? Is that one person? Is it multiple people? Have you thought about this recently? Does it need to be refreshed? Think about that. Does your school use two-factor authentication, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a second? How secure is your email? How do you protect personal information? Okay, so we're going to go into a little bit more detail with GSuite administration. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Jeff.
Thanks, Jim. I'll be sharing 3 ways schools can increase their security within the GSuite for Administration console, and we hope you'll find these tips to be of high value for little cost. So the first is multi-factor authentication. Security researchers agree that one of the best things you can do to improve your account security is to enable multi-factor authentication, which is also called two-factor authentication, and Google calls it two-step verification. What this is when logging into a device for the first time, you'll need your password and you'll have to use a second factor to log in. This can be a text message or notification prompt on your phone. So even if your password has been compromised, an attacker can't necessarily access your account. Hopefully many of you already have this enabled on your accounts, but for those of you who aren't using two-step verification on your Google account yet, now is the time to enable it. And consider making two-step verification mandatory for anyone with access to personally identifiable information, like business office staff, school leadership, and IT administrators. The second tip has to do with Google's advanced phishing and malware protections. Google introduced these settings in 2018 and expanded them in 2019. And what's key here is that these settings are not enabled by default. So ask your GSuite administrator to check the status of these settings in the admin console. You'll find them under the email safety section of the admin console. These settings help protect against spoofed emails by displaying large banner warnings. But note that these banner warnings only display in the Gmail web interface and the Gmail phone app, and not if you're using an email client like Outlook or the default mail app on a phone. These settings also protect against malicious links and attachments, either by displaying a warning or moving the message to quarantine. The third tip has to do with Google Takeout. Google Takeout is the name of the service which allows users to download or export all of their data in their school Google account. To safeguard your school's data and to prevent it from leaving the organization when you don't want it to, consider turning off the takeout service and turning it on an as-needed basis. We heard the story of one school who had an employee placed on administrative hold. In the middle of the night, that employee used account recovery options to reset his password and then used Takeout to download and export all data his account had access to, which put the school in a compromising situation. There are a few ways this could have been avoided, but one way would have been if the Takeout service was disabled from the start. With that, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them via the Q&A tool, and I'll pass things back over to Jim.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Definitely some things for us to consider. So we'd like to move now into Google applications, which is something that many of us are using on a regular basis. So we want to ask a few questions here. Which Google tools are your teachers and students using? Are we aware of the variety of tools they may be using? Do you get parent consent for using GSuite? And then are you familiar with FERPA and COPA and its alignment to Google applications? All right, now I'm going to pass it over to Crystal.
So thinking about some of the questions that Jim was just asking, first, FERPA and COPA, a lot of schools are not sure exactly what that means regarding to their school. And so FERPA and COPA are federal laws that protect students. And that's about collecting their data, that personal identifiable data or information that Jeff was talking about. And so there's a whole list of these. It could be their photo, their name, their address. It could even be like their IP address for their computer, their geolocation. So thinking about these kind of things of all the apps and websites that they're using, we have to be compliant for FERPA and COPA. So discussing it with GSuite core applications, these specific applications are covered by COPA and FERPA. And Tom will dig a little bit further later in them. But they really focus on keeping data secure and not having ads in GSuite. And so these specific ones that we're using in our schools are great collaborative products where you can easily email, you can share files and be working at the same time. So keeping those specific core applications in mind as we're moving forward. On the next slide, one of our favorite features that are really secure if you know how to use them in Google are when you're sharing files. So when you go into Google Drive, you can easily click on a share feature. And if you have it set up correctly within your organization, you can share a specific file right within your organization. So it's not public for everyone in your community to see, which is shown on the left. And then on the right, you also have some sharing features where you can prevent these editors from adding other people and having access. You can also disable them from downloading or printing or copying these files, which is really handy to have as well. Then on the next slide, we're going to be discussing a few other questions just with GSuite for Education. The first one, does your staff use click wraps? And everyone asks me, what in the world is a click wrap? So I'll tell you that on the next slide, don't worry. The next question is, how secure is your Google account? And the last one is, do you get parental consent prior to using these websites and apps? So as we're talking about click wraps, I'm sure you've been to any website that has said, can you sign in with this account? And a lot of times it's Google. So this is considered a click wrap where you have this single sign on with Google and it's connecting to your account. And a lot of times you can find how it's connected in these two different ways. On this first slide, if you go into Google Drive and just kind of scroll down under that new button, it says more. And you can see in my account, there's a lot more things that are connected. There's the Google Drawings and Maps, and there's Nearpod and Pear Deck and all these outside sources that's getting connected with my Google account because I clicked sign in with Google, which a lot of our staff and a lot of our students are already doing. But you have to keep in mind that are those specific websites under that consent of that vendor being signed off as an agreement of not collecting that student data. On the next slide, another feature when you're doing the exact same thing of that click wrap, if you go into, I call it the waffle, which is in the top right, it can be in your Google Drive, it could be in the top right when you open up a new tab, but it gives you access to your account. So that C where it says my account, it's telling you what specific apps have access to my account. And over on the right, it's telling you that I've clicked on Nearpod and how much access does Nearpod have to my account and is that safe? So thinking about those questions, what are your teachers using and your students using by just clicking sign in with Google? And do you have parent consent for using those external applications? And we'll dive into which ones are safe a little bit later. Additional services for Google are Maps and YouTube and Google Expeditions and Google Earth. And we have all these other cool, I mean, there's so many of them, I think around like 70 that we can be using that are not core apps. So you have a feature, Google has created this Guardian information website and also a consent letter that we can send out to you. So that letter gives information to parents and to students what exactly is being pulled from those. And we'll dive a little deeper in those with Tom. But those services are not core apps, so they're not falling under the FERPA and COPA compliance. So keep that in mind when using them. You do have an option in the admin console, if you're using Google, to turn off that ability to sign in. So if you don't want your students using YouTube because it's a crazy place to be in, you can turn that off for them, especially for the little ones and lower grades.
Great, thank you, Crystal. And looking at the Q&A right now, we see a question in there. This would be a time for you to throw in any questions that you might have. Crystal, would you mind sharing with us just one more time what was included in that personal information, things that would be identifiable information? There was a question on that.
Of course. So that personal information, I specifically was talking about, I mean, there's so many, but the first and last name, their physical address, their telephone number, maybe their student ID or social security number, but it even comes down to the device that they're using, like their IP address, for example. Are they sharing videos or photos and they're uploading these kind of things? So these are active data things that can be collected, and we have to make sure that those applications that we're using are safe.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that list is pretty long, pretty big, the idea of all that identifiable information. Thanks for the review on that. Okay, thanks for the question. We're gonna keep moving forward. We're now gonna pass it over to Tom, and he's gonna share with us a little bit about Google's stance and their commitment to student data.
All right. Hi, everyone. So first off, as the Google representative here, protecting your data is our top priority. We designed GSuite to meet very stringent privacy and security standards based on industry best standards and practices. We've worked really hard with third-party regulators and auditors to process and audit our data and look at how we handle that data to get these certifications listed. In addition to signing strong contractual agreements regarding data ownership, data use, security, transparency, and accountability. And what's the best thing of all, I think, about Google for Education tools is that we actually give the users the ability to completely own their data, delete their data, and use it the way they'd like to. At no point in time are we going to use a student's data to, do targeted advertisements or sell their data to any third parties, and that's why we've landed these certifications and compliance certifications above. So I'll transition to the next slide and talk a little bit about our commitments. So we've made some very strong commitments with GSuite for education. The first is that we will not serve ads to students ever through our core services. Students are protected from these. Two is you own your own data. So at any point in time, the data that's being collected does not belong to Google. This is fully owned by the domain owner, which is the school as well as the user. Your apps will always be accessible. So we have a 99.9% service agreement, meaning that you'll be able to access any app that you need at any point in time. We have a 0.01% downtime. And last, you stay in control and in the know. So we're very transparent about our data and the data that we're using on the back end to improve our systems. And you can actually view that that agreement in full at our privacy center, which I'll be following up with for you all. So there's 4 things to know about, 4 really key takeaways about Google for Education. One is that we keep data incredibly secure. And so it's pretty amazing the lengths that we've gone to at Google to make sure that that data stays very secure and private. We actually build our own fiber lines that actually span the globe. We build our own custom hardware to make sure that even our internal data can't be hacked. And we even have a prize for $100,000 if you can hack a Chromebook. So we take it very seriously, and it's a big sense of pride. 2 is that there will never be ads in GSuite for Education core services. Those ads that Crystal had, or those key apps that Crystal had talked about. At no point in time will you ever see a targeted advertisement in there, or any advertisement for that matter. 3rd, Google supports compliance with industry regulations and best practices. So those core services have been vetted and audited several times to make sure that they are compliant with SIPA and FERPA. And last, you have clear information about what our privacy and security policies are. And like I said, there's a fantastic site called our security and privacy site that outlines all of this for you. And then we have our service agreement policy that's easily accessible as well. And those are kind of 4 key tenets to know about Google for Education. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how we keep our data secure. So like I said, this is kind of something we take very seriously, and we know that schools are entrusting us with their data, and our systems are among the most secure and vigorously vetted throughout the nation. So like I said, we have actual custom hardware running custom systems on our back end to make sure that our entire hardware stack is controlled, so that there can't be any malpractice or any bad attempts against us. We're constantly updating our systems and fixing bugs and patches to make sure that our systems are up to date and are able to thwart any kind of bad actors who might want to steal data. We also encrypt Gmail and Drive data so that these messages cannot be decrypted and shared broadly and hacked. So this slide is really meant to just say one thing, and it's very difficult to hack Google, especially when we own the entire hardware stack and we've custom made that to prevent such things. What are GSuite core services? I think Crystal did a great job of covering those. Those include Gmail, Calendar, Classroom, Jamboard, Contacts, Drive, Docs, Forms, Groups, Sheets, Sites, Slide, and Hangouts, as well as Vault. So those are our core GSuite for Education. And so those are all FERPA and COPA compliant. They are meant to kind of be the foundational tools that students can use to learn collaboratively in the classroom. There are also, of course, additional services, which we talked a little bit about those. Expeditions would be an example. Google Maps would be an example. These services are not considered FERPA and COPA compliant. The reason for that is that many students accidentally will be signed into one of those services. And at that point, since they're no longer in a core GSuite service, their data may be collected as part outside of the core services. So that's why we caution very strongly about students using these additional services outside of the core services. And we try to educate teachers and educators to be very careful when using those, and possibly using incognito mode or making sure that students aren't signed in. Another big additional service is YouTube, which is just my giant next slide. YouTube is a very challenging one for Google for Education. I actually probably get about a quarter of my emails from districts about YouTube because it is such a a challenging environment to subject students to, because it is just a whole content. There's just content from every which way that is nearly impossible to be monitored by YouTube. And so it's also very hard for students to have a completely incognito experience on YouTube without being signed in. So that's why actually our stance at Google for Education is to not use YouTube and recommend not using YouTube. However, we live in the real world, and we know it's also a fantastic tool for lots of students and teachers. So I believe Jim had some good ideas about how to successfully manage YouTube in your district. So I'll turn it over to him for a second.
And I will quickly redirect it to Crystal. Crystal would like to share with you a few of the solutions, because YouTube is pretty much everywhere at our schools. She has a few things to consider and some tools to check out.
All right, so for some solutions for YouTube, because of course all of our teachers love to use it. It's a great resource, even if you're watching Build the Science Guy. We tell the teachers, for example, first to use uBlock Origin, which is an ad blocker, and it doesn't have that automatic advertisement that shows up on their screen when they're showing it in front of the class. There's none of those ads popping up, and it works on other websites too, which is really great. There's also features built into the administration console where you can whitelist videos. And our teachers are also using some websites like Edpuzzle. This is an approved vendor where they're not taking your data. The teacher puts that YouTube video into Edpuzzle and shows it that way. And they can even ask questions built right into Edpuzzle, which is pretty cool. So a lot of these don't have ads, and it doesn't have all those extra features that we don't need to use from YouTube. So we try to find these workarounds that are best for our schools.
Awesome. So a common question that we get, since Google is known for their advertising, is, does Google sell school or student data to third parties at any point? And the answer is no. We don't ever sell GSuite data to third parties. We do not share personal information in our systems or with third parties, except if there's an exceptional instance. So if there's a breach in the privacy policy, such as there could be some kind of police investigation or FBI investigation, at that point we would consider sharing that data. However, our policy stands that otherwise we would not. There are no ads in the core services, as I mentioned. However, outside of those additional services, we cannot guarantee that a student won't be served ads. That's why, of course, they're called core services and they're completely vetted, and we're not able to provide that experience for secondary services or additional services. I did see a question in the Q&A that I wanted to address about why we don't make those additional services core services. It's a great question. I remember asking the same question myself when I joined the team. The answer is that it requires a ton of vetting and also manpower in order to make sure that they meet these stringent standards to keep these as educational core services. So there's an entire team on each of these products that works to make sure they stay within compliance, and we can't guarantee that for all of our products across the board, unfortunately. I'll move on to the next slide, which is about accessibility. So this is something that is near and dear to my heart, making sure that all students have equal access to technology and devices. What's great about Chromebooks and G Suite is that inherently they're pretty accessible. There are a lot of tools that not a lot of folks are aware of. And there actually is an accessibility center that would be well worth passing on to any special education teachers in your building or that that actually have outlined these and actually show these best practices. In Chrome, we have a ton of visual aids. We have mono audio, spoken feedback, and then a voice first interface. We're actually able to toggle and navigate your Chrome browser through through voice activation. And then on GSuite, one of our newer features is closed captioning in Google Slides, which now you're able to move top or bottom and change the size of the font. So it's actually providing live subtitling. Voice typing, editing, and formatting is very popular in GSuite. We have a Braille function as well as a screen reader and magnifier. So again, our goal is to make sure that the tools that we're building are usable and accessible to anyone who would want to use them. I'd also heard that there are some folks out there who are working in international schools. And while I'll admit that is not my expertise, being just working in California, I do know that we are GDPR compliant, and that we have done a ton of work to make sure it stays that way. There is a GDPR website that you can access that has a whole read through as to how we are GDPR compliant, and the different tenets that we meet and how we've done that. So we'll be sure to share the deck with you after, so you have access to that as well. Last but not least, I just wanted to plug a tool that we launched last June at ISTE called the Chromebook App Hub. And the Chromebook App Hub is simply a library of apps that Google for Education has vetted that we recommend in the classroom. And you're actually able to sort those resources by grade level, by content area, so that you're able to find like interesting fits for different applications that you might need. So for example, if you're looking for a science-related app for fourth graders, you could filter that way and it'll pull up suggestions. They also have idea sparks for lessons that for teachers that are stuck. But it also is a great place for both student privacy policies on each of these apps that have been vetted that you can access easily, and any seals that they might have for COPA seals, etc. So just a great tool to have in your back pocket as well. And I believe that covers it for me.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thanks for the overview. Thanks for sharing with us Google's commitments. I know student data is always really a hot topic, trying to understand how Google engages with that. So thank you for the clarity on that. This is a pause point for us to field any other questions. So we don't see, we see a question in here, and we'll see if any of us can answer this. So there's a question in here about California Consumer Protection Act, or CCPA compliance. Do we have that information right now about what policies and services are in place to see what information has been shared with third parties?
This is Tom again. Not at this time, I'm not sure. I'd imagine that we would discuss that with our site group, the Student Data Privacy Alliance.
Okay.
But this time, I can't comment on that. I'm not sure.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, so now the second kind of half of today, which is actually going to be a little bit shorter of a segment, is around the topic of student data privacy resources. And so we've been talking a lot about data this afternoon. And so these are a couple questions to get you also thinking about this specific topic. So how do I know if a website or app is safe for students? So this goes even beyond just the GSuite for Education applications. And then how do we sign our school up so we are safe to use a specific app or website? Is there a resource out there that we can partner with? And so Crystal is going to share with us a little bit about student data privacy resources and some of the current initiatives that exist across the country.
Great, thank you. So if you have yet to hear about SETPA, which they now call CITE, it's this consortium where if you go to the website, it's this statewide agreement, and they have one for each state, that you can easily find out if a vendor complies with the student data privacy laws. It's free to sign up. And once you are looking and upload the websites and applications that you're using, and you only upload the ones that you know have that sign on for that student data, that personal identifiable information, when they're logging on to something, you can find out if the vendor has been approved. So once they're approved or declined, you can sign off on another school's vendor contract. And that's the way that this whole website is set up, is basically you can search for the vendor. Once you're a part of this website, then you can sign off on the already made agreements, and it's super easy to use. And the reason why like I'm pushing this specifically is just pushing those vendors as this whole national consortium is making sure that they're following the FERPA and COPA laws. So on the next slide, you'll see that there's already been 750 breaches, different types. So there's been phishing attacks and of course ransomware and all those other things that I'm sure come through people's emails that they just click on and then they have malware or whatever data that they're taking. So of course, getting your school safe is the #1 priority. And if you get onto that website, the site website, you'll see resources and how to sign up easily. So if you feel like when you click on it that you're not sure about this process or it feels a little daunting, feel free to contact us at Knowing Technologies, and we can lead you through that process. It's pretty easy for us.
Thank you, Crystal. It's really great information around how to get started in this space. Some of our schools may have already been taking steps forward in this space, and some this might be the first time. So thank you for that information. There's another question that's come through around two-factor authentication. So we're kind of jumping back just a little bit. And the question is, do you see any issues in requiring two-factor authentication and asking employees to use personal cell phones? So two-factor authentication in itself, I know, can be a challenge, and it definitely takes some getting used to. It can sometimes be seen as an additional step, but the security benefits, I think, outweigh sometimes the annoyances. Jeff, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have anecdotally heard about some employees objecting to this. And one solution is, rather than using SMS or text messaging as a second factor, when they install one of the Google apps, like the Gmail or the Authenticator app, it does not require them paying for text messaging if they're paying for that. Another angle to that question is the super administrator of your GSuite domain is able to go in and create backup codes if that's ever part of the problem. Like, you as the administrator are not locked out from that user's account when they have two-factor set up with a personal cell phone.
I've also seen one of our schools that we partner with, they've also used some of the in-classroom phones. So there's a few different options that you guys could probably consider. So it'd probably be helpful to meet as a leadership team to think about the implementation of this, kind of taking a more strategic approach to it. So thanks for that question. And this is moving us towards the end of this conversation. And so just to recap, we have spent some time this afternoon looking at GSuite admin setup, asking you a series of questions around how to kind of increase your security practices. We have talked about and defined the differences between core and non-core applications. Tom has shared Google's commitment and how data is actually being used within the GSuite environment, and specifically around the core and non-core applications. So hopefully that was clear to you. And lastly, we gave you a few resources to start to explore as you begin to navigate what this means for your school community. And so we provided some resources around student data privacy and that alliance that you could start to connect with. So lastly, if there is interest in connecting with us at Knowing Technologies, we do have a range of expertise in technology across all different solutions that you might specifically be looking for, whether it's in the topics that we discussed today or if it's outside. We are the ones that you can contact. So if you are interested in taking action on this or anything outside of it, please do contact us. at info@knowingtechnologies.com. Thank you for joining us, and we will be sending out a feedback form. There's a kind of a short URL right there, and we'll make sure to follow up with a feedback form so we can also see and get feedback from you all and see if you're interested in connecting with us after this afternoon. So I'd like to thank Martha for helping us to coordinate today. I'd like to thank all of us that were on the panel, and I'd like to thank all of our guests today. We're hoping today was informative and helpful, insightful. Hopefully it answered some of the questions that you came in, and hopefully you're leaving with some good stuff to take back to your school sites.
This is Martha. I just want to add a couple things. So first of all, thank you, everybody. Second of all, also feel free to email me if you're feeling a little shy about Knowing Technologies. You can email me if you have some follow-up questions on this topic, because I really am very interested in how we can best support not just the business office, but the business office and the technology function. It's something that we're very interested in. It's two areas in the school that are very aligned, and so I would be very interested in your thoughts on that. Secondly, as far as the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, it just went into effect in January, this month, I believe. There are a lot of questions around it. There are a lot of questions on what it does beyond, the European privacy laws. There are some differences. You might, if you have the opportunity to talk to an attorney that knows about it. I have actually reviewed contracts with an attorney for the association, kind of looking at it in that context. It doesn't really apply that much to us because there are revenue floors there are revenue floors. There's some questions about nonprofit versus for-profit. I don't want to give my interpretation of it because I'm still really uncertain on it, but it's just one of those things to be aware of. It's not something to be frightened of. There is some information out there on it that is general broad strokes, and if you're, it generally has to do with the selling of consumer information, but it is something that you should be aware of. So that's just to kind of wrap up that topic. But you can always reach out to me with any questions or ideas, and we're here, and I thank everyone. If there are no more questions, we're gonna end the webinar now, and we will post the presentation and the recording online once Andrea has a chance to kind of clean up the recording a little bit, and you will find it behind the wall in the Access Member Benefits section. So thank you, everybody.